At first I thought it was just coincidence, but every time the 29th rolls around, a new grave opens, already dug. And there's someone inside it, still moving. Would you bury someone alive, if it were the only way not to be next? Drop your answer in the comments. I don't mark days anymore by the calendar on my wall, though I keep it out of habit, stuck on a rusty nail just above the breaker box behind my desk. I've stopped flipping its pages. The paper's curled with moisture and neglect, but it doesn't matter, because the only date that matters to me now is the 29th, and not because of birthdays or memorials or anniversaries. No, I remember it because the ground does. Every 29th, without fail, I wake up to the same thing, a new hole. Always in the western row, 3 plots down from the gnarled oak that leans like it's eavesdropping on the dead. The grave is already dug when I get there. Deep, precise, almost respectful. The edges are clean. The soil's piled in the exact same way, never spilled, never loose. And the strange thing is, there are no signs of tools, no wheelbarrow tracks, no boot prints, no disturbed grass. It's like the earth simply opened itself during the night while no one was watching. Sometimes it smells like rain, even if the sky's been dry for weeks. Not just rain, but that early spring kind. Wet bark, moss, something metallic hiding under the leaves. I used to tell myself it was just some prank, maybe kids messing with me, or even someone from the crematorium who thought it'd be funny. But there are only so many times you can lie to yourself before the silence starts to answer back. The first time it happened, I didn't touch the grave. I stood there for nearly 2 hours, waiting for someone, anyone, to show up and claim responsibility. No one did. I filled it back in with a sense of guilt I didn't understand. The soil felt resistant, like trying to push water uphill, like it didn't want to be resealed. That night I slept badly. I kept thinking I heard something scratching, a soft series of shifts, like cloth brushing against wood, like breath being held too long. The second time, I told myself it was coincidence. The third time, I couldn't pretend anymore. Something wanted someone buried, and it wanted me to do it. I should explain that I've been a gravedigger for 29 years. Ironic, isn't it? I've buried veterans with flags, infants in boxes too small to breathe, mothers beside sons, suicides who left no notes, drunks, saints, soldiers, and men who asked to be forgotten. I've worked this land so long I know where the dirt changes color, where the tree roots twist under plots, where the ground sinks by an inch after 7 years. I know death like you know your living room in the dark. But this wasn't death. Not quite. I started keeping records. Private ones. I logged the time I discovered each grave, always around 6:11 a.m. I documented the weather. Clear, foggy, windy, didn't matter. I even took pictures, though they never developed right. There was always a blur near the bottom edge of the photo, like a hand trying to wave the lens away. The 4th grave was the one that pushed me over, because that time, the casket was already there. A plain wooden one. No markings. No delivery record. I asked the funeral director, checked every logbook. Nothing. But the box was there, centered perfectly at the bottom of the pit. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I filled the dirt in and told myself, again, that I didn't have to understand it to do it. That was the first time I felt the ground vibrate beneath my boots. It wasn't much, just a ripple, like a breath exhaled by something buried too long. Since then, the graves have come monthly. Same day, same time. I tried setting up cameras. None of them work past midnight on the 28th. The files get corrupted. The memory cards blank themselves. I even stayed up once with a flashlight and a thermos of coffee, trying to catch it in the act. I must have dozed off sometime after 3 a.m., because when I blinked, the sun was up, and the grave was already open behind me, clean, fresh, waiting. I've stopped trying to stop it. I don't fill the holes anymore unless they're filled first. Because I learned something on the 6th time. The graves don't stay empty. The last time I refused to bury one, I left it open as a test. The following morning, the coffin was still there, but it wasn't empty anymore. I don't know who put the body in. I don't know when or how, but it was a young woman, hands folded, face serene. I recognized her from a missing poster I'd seen years ago in the post office. And when I looked closer, I saw something else. Under her fingernails, the same red clay that lines the western row. I buried her. No words. No headstone. Just like the others. I tried calling the sheriff once. Left a message. He never returned it. Next week, I saw his cruiser parked near the crematorium, with the windows fogged from the inside. He didn't come back after that. I still see the new grave each month. and now I've begun to sense its arrival the night before. A shift in the wind. A strange drop in the temperature. Sometimes I hear footsteps outside my trailer, crunching in gravel that shouldn't echo. Always on the 28th. Always just after midnight. I no longer ask questions. I simply wake up, lace my boots, take the same path down the hill, and meet the Earth's demand. Each burial takes exactly 27 minutes. I don't know why, but if I go slower or faster, things start to go wrong. Tools break, lights flicker, the birds stop singing. Once, I was late by 5 minutes because my watch stopped. That was the time I saw a second grave being dug beside the first. I managed to finish in time, and the second hole never completed itself. But I remember the shape of it. It was the same dimensions as my father's plot. He died 10 years ago, buried on the eastern side. I haven't checked if he's still there. I'm afraid to. This month will be different, I think. The air has felt heavier. The 29th is coming again. And my calendar. It turned by itself this morning. The page was curled back. June. And someone had circled the date in red. Not pen, not marker, but something smeared. Something sticky. I touched it. It smelled like soil. Or blood. I'm tired. But I'll be there. I always am. Because the grave will be waiting. Open. Silent. Expectant. And I'll do what I've done for years now. Bury whoever, or whatever, it leaves behind. Because the only thing more terrifying than obeying is finding out what happens if I don't. The second time it happened, I told myself it was just some kind of nervous twitch in my eye or the heat playing tricks on my mind, because I couldn't admit what I'd really seen. I had gone to the grave early that morning, still dark out. Sky that colorless gray before the sun claws over the ridge. The air was too still, and the fog hung low like a warning draped across the rows of headstones. As usual, the grave was already there. Same spot on the western row. Same flawless edges. Same smell of rain despite a dry forecast. But this time, when I peered in, something was different. I didn't feel alone. I couldn't explain it. But it was like the grave was looking back. I told myself that was nonsense. Dirt doesn't watch. Earth doesn't breathe. Except I heard it. I crouched down slowly. Flashlight in one hand, heart thudding like someone knocking from the inside. I aimed the light down and swept it across the bottom. That's when I saw it. A figure. A man. I couldn't see his face clearly, not yet. He was buried chest deep, like the dirt had swallowed him halfway and stopped. But that wasn't what made me drop the light. It was the movement. His chest. Rising. Falling. Slowly. Methodically. Breathing. Not like the final exhale of a body giving in. No. This was living breath. Paced and strong. The kind you hear when someone's trying not to panic. And then his eyes opened. They were glassy at first, almost like those of a corpse. But then they focused, and they locked on mine. I staggered back, scraping my hand against the shovel. My first instinct was to run, but something made me stay. Maybe that sick curiosity that infects all gravediggers eventually. The part of us that wants to see what shouldn't be seen. I crawled back to the edge and looked again. His mouth was moving. No sound, just lips forming shapes. I strained to read them. My name. He was saying my name, over and over, like a chant. I reached for the shovel, not knowing what I planned to do with it. Dig him out? Knock myself unconscious and pretend it hadn't happened? I didn't get the chance to choose. The breath stopped. Not slowly. Instantly. Like a switch flipped off. The chest stilled. The eyes glazed over. The body went limp. And just like that, the man was gone. I blinked. Blinked again. The grave was empty. Not filled in. Just hollow. Silent. No footprints. No disturbed earth. I remember crawling into the grave to check. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My boots hit the bottom, and I stood there, trying to make sense of the warmth still lingering in the soil. That was what disturbed me most. The heat. Like someone had just vacated a bed. I climbed out, sat on the nearby stone bench, and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself it didn't happen, that it couldn't have happened. But later, as I cleaned my hands in the utility sink, I noticed something that froze me worse than anything else had that morning. On my wrist, smeared faintly just above the bone, was a print. A partial handprint, pressed in the same reddish clay that lines the western row. It wasn't mine. Too small. Too slender. Like someone had reached up from beneath the earth and touched me. I scrubbed it raw until the skin peeled. But I still felt it there, like an echo in my nerves. That night I locked everything. Gate, trailer, shed. Didn't sleep. Just sat with the lights on, staring at the calendar, waiting. Because if the grave had eyes, if the dead could breathe, then the next time the 29th came, I didn't know what I'd find. I just knew it wouldn't be a corpse. And I was right, because it got worse. It always does. It was still dark when I stepped outside, the kind of morning where the air feels like it's holding its breath, and I could almost believe for a second that maybe today the ground wouldn't open, maybe the western row would stay undisturbed, and the world would forget its rituals. But the instant I rounded the chapel's corner, I saw it again. The soil pulled back in that same clean, impossible shape. No shovel marks, no footprints, just a mouth in the earth yawning wide like it had something to say. It never made noise, but it always felt loud, like it had been screaming all night into the quiet. The light from the eastern sky hadn't reached the grave yet, but I could already see the outline of the folded paper resting perfectly at the head of the pit, like it had grown there. I knew what it would be before I picked it up. I always did. Still, my hands shook as I reached for it, and my breath shortened the way it does when your mind hasn't caught up to what your body already knows. I unsealed it with the ease of someone who's done this too many times. There was always just one page, one line, one time, and always the same signature. Mine, full name, unmistakable. The curve of the R, the way I crossed the T too low, habits no one else had because no one else taught me to write but me. This one said, complete it by 3:17 a.m. I checked my watch, 3:03. 14 minutes to finish a burial I hadn't even begun. My fingers crumpled the note before I realized what I was doing, but the damage didn't matter. The moment I stepped closer to the grave, everything else, doubt, fear, logic, fell behind like ash in wind. There was movement again. Always is. Slow, shallow inhales. The kind of breath you'd never hear unless you bent close enough to feel it against your cheek. I didn't want to look, not this time, not again. But my knees bent without asking, and when I leaned in, I saw her. A girl. Couldn't have been older than 12. Her eyes were open and blinking slowly, dreamily, like she hadn't yet decided which world she was in. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Only her lips, forming a shape I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe a name, maybe a number, maybe a prayer. I tried to speak. I don't remember what I meant to say, but my voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. She didn't react, just blinked once more, as if to tell me she knew, that I was going to do it anyway. I stepped back. My boots dug into the edge of the grave and slid a little. It's always like this. Every 29th, a new body, always alive, always knowing, and always a note written in my hand, commanding me to do what no man should. But this time felt worse. Not because of her age, not even because of the look in her eyes. It was the handwriting on the note. Something was off, just slightly. The loop in the L was tighter than mine. The baseline of the sentence leaned downward. Still mine, but not exactly. As if someone else had studied it, mimicked it, rehearsed it until it almost became me. That tiny difference made something tremble at the edge of my sanity. I reached for my coat pocket and pulled out all the notes I'd kept. I wasn't supposed to. They always vanished after I buried them. Burned themselves, dissolved in rain, got eaten by the earth, I don't know. But 3 of them I'd managed to hide in a rusted toolbox in the back shed, wrapped in plastic, and tucked under spare bolts and twine. And now, in the cold dark just before the sun could see me, I held them up against the newest one. The first was flawless, exactly like my hand. The second, nearly so. The third had 2 misspellings. The word complete, missing the second E. Now this one, with its slope, its off-kilter cadence. Whoever, or whatever, was writing these was changing, learning, evolving, becoming. I stood still for too long. The wind picked up, sweeping dry leaves across the ground like brittle fingers. My watch read 3:15. I had 2 minutes. I grabbed the shovel, hands stiff and hesitant, and stood at the edge. She didn't look at me anymore. Her eyes had drifted shut, but she was still breathing, still waiting, still trusting, in a way that made me feel more monstrous than anything buried here. The first toss of dirt was always the hardest. It landed softly across her torso, and her body reacted. A flinch, or a reflex, or maybe a memory of what's coming. My watch beeped once. 3:16. I worked faster. I couldn't cry. That left me years ago. Couldn't scream either. No one would hear. But I whispered one word under my breath, over and over with each throw of earth. Sorry. It didn't change anything. It never does. But it's the only thing I have left that still sounds human. By 3:17, the grave was sealed. I tamped it gently, packed it flat, and placed the stone marker, blank, always blank, at its head. The air shifted then, as it always does, like the world had exhaled again. I sat down beside it, hands muddy, sweat freezing to my skin, and I reread the note. Every angle of it, every mark. The signature at the bottom shimmered faintly now, only for a second, but enough. Enough for me to see the truth. The name was mine, but the ink had been written backward. Mirror writing, a perfect reverse. My handwriting, written from the other side of the glass. And that's when I knew. I wasn't the one giving the orders. I was the one following them. Just like the girl, just like the others. Only I hadn't been buried yet. Not physically, not entirely. But someone on the other side of the grave knew how. And he was getting better at becoming me. Faster, closer. The next note would be flawless, and I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I kept telling myself that I could stop any time I wanted, that no one was forcing my hand, that these rituals, this pattern, this curse, this nightmare, was something I could walk away from if I simply had the will. But on the morning of the next 29th, I found myself already dressed before sunrise, boots laced, shovel in hand, and thermos full of coffee that had gone cold before I even tasted it. The gravel under my feet whispered as I crossed the cemetery path toward the western row, as if mocking me, as if reminding me that this ground was no longer just soil and memory. It was a stage, and I was the only actor left performing a role written by someone I'd never seen. The grave was there again, exactly as before. Fresh, damp earth peeled back in that impossible curve, undisturbed by tools or weather. The edges of the hole were smooth, too smooth, like fingers, or something else, had sculpted it with precision beyond human effort. There was no wind, but the air felt thick with a pressure that settled in my skull and chest, and as I approached the edge, the whispers started. They came not in a sudden burst, but in a slow trickle, like fog bleeding through cracks in the world. At first it sounded like the rustling of dry grass, the scraping of roots, or maybe the creaking of old wood shifting beneath the ground. But then the cadence changed. Soft, deliberate, rhythmic. It was language, a voice, then two, then dozens. Not loud, not in any rush to be heard, just there, low and constant, like the breath of someone sleeping beside you who never quite wakes. They spoke in tones that seemed to come from every direction at once. Male, female, young, old, some high like a child's lullaby, others gravelly and broken, like the last words of a dying man. None of them screamed. That was the worst part. None begged or cried or cursed the sky. They just whispered the same phrase over and over again, each voice fading in and out like waves at different tides. Don't do this again. I stood at the edge, not yet looking down, afraid to meet the eyes of whoever or whatever waited this time. I tried plugging my ears once, a few months ago, stuffing cotton so deep it scraped my eardrums raw. But the voices came anyway, not just in sound, but in sensation. They vibrated inside my bones, in the enamel of my teeth, in the backs of my eyes. No barrier could stop them, because they weren't using my ears. They were using me, tunneling up from the hollow ground beneath and bleeding into my thoughts. I wondered again who they were, where they came from, whether they were people once, or if the earth had grown its own mouths. I crouched down slowly, careful not to fall forward into the open soil. My fingers brushed the rim of the pit, and the dampness felt almost warm, as if the hole itself were alive. I finally looked down. A man this time. Late 40s maybe. Salt and pepper hair slicked against his forehead with sweat. His chest rose and fell with shallow, mechanical rhythm. Like breath wasn't a choice but a curse. His lips were moving, whispering too, but not the same words. His eyes were closed, and the muscles in his face twitched every few seconds, like he was caught in some looping dream that offered no end. I leaned in, just enough to hear. His whisper was slower, deliberate. Not again, he said. Please, not again. I recognized his voice. I didn't know why at first. It was like hearing yourself on an old tape recorder. Familiar, but strange. Like it came from a version of you that no longer exists. And when he opened his eyes, I understood. They weren't mine. But they looked like mine used to, years ago, before I started digging, before the bags and the wear and the subtle shift that had made mirrors lie. I reached for my pocket. No note this time. Nothing to tell me what to do. Nothing to sign the order. Just the whispers and the open grave. I told myself I didn't have to continue, that the lack of a note meant I was free to walk away, that I could let this one go, that maybe it was a test, and if I passed, it would all end. But the voices disagreed. They didn't get louder. They didn't plead. They just kept speaking in unison, like a single breath shared across countless mouths. Don't do this again. I sat beside the grave for what felt like an hour, maybe more, listening to the chorus of forgotten warnings rise and fall like a tide of guilt. I thought of all the graves I'd filled, all the ones that had whispered, all the ones that had eyes. I remembered the girl from last month, her name. I never learned it, but she blinked in time with the wind like she was counting down, and when I dropped the last shovel of dirt, I swore I heard her say, "Thank you," like I'd done her a favor by ending it. That's the paradox. I don't know if I'm saving them or damning them. I don't know if the burial ends their pain or begins it. I only know that I'm the constant. The variable is the body. The instructions change, but I'm always the hands. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the whispers wash over me. One of them said my name, not loudly, not demanding, just stating it, like a fact, like a reminder. I opened my eyes and stood. The shovel was already in the ground. I don't remember planting it. My hands moved on their own, and the first toss of dirt fell like a sigh. The voices faded slightly with each layer, muffled but not silenced. The man inside stopped whispering once the soil reached his chest. His mouth remained open, caught in mid-plea. When the dirt covered his face, the rest of the voices rose in brief protest, then dropped again into their slow, resigned rhythm. By the time I patted the last layer flat and placed the marker, no name, no date, there was only one voice left, mine, whispering without lips, inside my skull, over and over. Don't do this again, but I know I will, because it's not just the ground that hollows with every burial. It's me. Something inside is being emptied, piece by piece, whisper by whisper. And soon there'll be nothing left but the voice, and the shovel, and the grave that opens without a sound. It wasn't until the 7th time that I stopped pretending I didn't understand. By then, I had already buried 6 bodies that breathed, whispered, and sometimes bled into the dirt as if life still clung to their lungs like fog on cold glass. I told myself they were hallucinations, that grief or guilt had nested in my brain after too many years tending to the forgotten dead. But that morning, the 29th again, I woke up to a silence so thick it swallowed the ticking of my kitchen clock and the rustle of the branches outside my window. There was no note that day, no envelope waiting on the counter, just a faint scent in the air, damp, familiar, like the earth from the western row had followed me home. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't need to. My body already knew where I had to go, and my mind had stopped resisting the compulsion that had long ago disguised itself as duty. The western row was always waiting. The grave was there, as always, perfectly formed, dug by hands that left no mark, no displaced stone or careless spade line. It looked like the earth had decided to open itself again, yawning beneath the weight of some old agreement I must have made without memory. This time, something was different. The air was colder, but not sharp, cold like breath held too long in a locked chest. The whispers were delayed, as if waiting to see whether I would choose to begin. That pause alone should have warned me, should have told me that whatever waited below was not just another mouth asking for mercy, but I was already leaning over the edge before the thought could settle. The coffin was older than usual, not one of the newer polished ones the funeral homes used when they wanted to impress. This was wood so dark and warped it looked like it had been soaked in tar and nightmares. There were scratches along the lid, not frantic, but methodical, like someone had tried to carve their way out with bone or fingernail. I lowered myself to my knees. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have walked away and let the whispers fade into the grass like mist. But the lock was undone, the lid already cracked, as if it wanted me to look, as if it had been waiting for my eyes. I lifted the lid and saw my own face looking back, not in the way mirrors lie, not in the way dreams steal familiar shapes and twist them into symbols. No, it was my face, my exact face. Same scar above the right brow from when I fell on a rusted pipe as a boy. Same uneven beard growth. Same thinning hair at the temples. Same slight twitch at the corner of my lip. He was breathing, barely. His eyes were closed, but his fingers moved slowly against the lining of the coffin, tapping in rhythm, like he was counting something I couldn't hear. I tried to speak. I tried to ask who he was, but my throat closed. Not with fear, but with understanding. I knew who he was, or what he was, or what I had become. He stirred. His eyes opened, and he looked directly at me. The moment his gaze met mine, something inside me unraveled. Not in panic, but in quiet collapse. His eyes were wet, not from tears, but from something more ancient. Grief, maybe. Grief that had waited too long for someone to notice. His lips moved. He mouthed my name, not like a question, not like a greeting, but like an accusation whispered through a locked door. I reached out instinctively, but my fingers stopped just before touching his chest. I could feel his warmth, feel the breath beneath his ribs, and something deeper still, something pulsing like a second heartbeat. Not his, not mine, but shared. I backed away. My hand brushed the dirt beside the coffin. The whispers returned then, louder than before, almost frustrated. A chorus of voices pressed through the soil like roots, repeating the same phrase I thought I'd grown numb to. Don't do this again. But this time, they were saying it to him. Not to me, or maybe not. I stood and staggered backward. My shovel was still upright in the ground where I'd planted it out of habit. For a moment, I thought of using it to pry him out, to lift the body, my body, from the coffin, and drag him into the sunlight. But the thought felt foreign, wrong, like waking up in someone else's dream and trying to change the ending. I picked up the shovel. My hands were steady. There was no note to guide me, no instruction to justify what I was about to do, only instinct. And the unbearable certainty that this was always going to happen. The first shovel of dirt hit his chest like a drum beat. His eyes closed. The second, he exhaled. The third, his lips stopped moving. And with each toss after that, I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not relief, just inevitability. The voices calmed. The air grew warmer. The sky, for the first time on a 29th, cracked open with sunlight that didn't feel like mockery. I finished the burial. I didn't place a marker. I didn't speak a word. I stood above the grave long after the last mound had been shaped, not thinking, not breathing, just being. The wind picked up. The cemetery creaked. And when I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the chapel window. He smiled first. I didn't smile back. I still don't know if the thing I buried was me, or the part of me that remembered what I used to be. All I know is that something shifted that day. The ground no longer waits. It anticipates. And the face I see in the mirror moves like it knows a secret I'm no longer allowed to hear. Maybe the whispers have moved inside. Maybe I'm the one mouthing, "Don't do this again," when I sleep. Or maybe, just maybe, I finally did what the ground wanted. Buried the last piece of hesitation. The last flicker of doubt. The final witness. And now the 29th won't even need a grave to be ready. Lately, I've stopped turning on the bathroom light when I brush my teeth. Not because I'm afraid of the dark. Not in the way children are. But because I'm afraid the mirror will decide to look back first. I used to catch glimpses of myself out of rhythm. Tiny delays in motion. Subtle things at first. Like my hand reaching for the toothbrush, and the reflection following a fraction too slowly. At first I thought it was exhaustion. Sleep deprivation does strange things. I told myself that after years of tending the cemetery, waking up to graves that dig themselves, and burying people who shouldn't be breathing, it was normal for the mind to start showing cracks. But one morning, I leaned in close to the mirror to examine a scratch that had appeared on my cheek overnight, and my reflection didn't lean with me. It stayed perfectly still, eyes fixed on mine, lips parted just slightly as if it had something to say, but was waiting for the right moment to say it. Then, as I stepped back, it smiled. Not a friendly smile, not even a sinister one, just an acknowledgement, like it finally had the upper hand. And then it moved. First. Before me. I didn't brush my teeth that morning. I went to the cemetery early, long before the 29th, long before the sun had burned away the chill from the wet grass. I needed the earth. I needed the graveyard's quiet more than ever. The dead don't play tricks. The dead don't smile when they shouldn't. But even there, among stones and silence, I started to feel watched. Not by ghosts. Not by something otherworldly. But by myself. By something wearing me with more confidence than I ever had. I'd catch sight of my reflection in the polished surface of a headstone or the window of the chapel, and there it would be, standing straighter, blinking less, looking more complete. It didn't look like a man losing his grip. It looked like a man who had taken it from someone else. A better version, perhaps, or just one with fewer doubts. The shovel felt heavier that day, though I wasn't digging. I wandered between the rows, feeling the weight of something unsaid between me and the soil. It wasn't until I saw the chapel door ajar that I remembered I'd locked it the night before. Inside, the light was already on, and in the center aisle, standing perfectly still, was a man. From behind, he wore my coat. Same scuffed sleeves. Same faded patch from the time it caught on barbed wire. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. I knew the angle of those shoulders. I knew how that spine bent under quiet guilt. I took one step inside, and he moved. Not toward me, but toward the front of the chapel, where the old mirror hung behind the pulpit. And when I looked up, I saw it. Two versions of me. One standing, one reflecting, neither aligned with how I was breathing. I don't remember how I got home. The walk is less than a mile, but that night it stretched like an ocean. My feet were covered in mud when I reached my porch, and I found dirt under my nails that smelled like the Western Row again. The next morning, there was blood on my bedsheets. Just a smear, like someone had pressed their hand into the pillowcase and pulled away slowly. And when I checked my closet, one of my jackets was gone, the one I saw him wearing. From that point on, my reflection started moving with more independence. Not all the time, and not in obvious ways. It was more like timing. I'd blink and feel the pause between us widen. I'd turn my head, and the reflection would hesitate, almost as if waiting for permission. I stopped shaving. I let my beard grow in uneven, hoping the reflection wouldn't match me anymore. But it did. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Even the scar. Mine is jagged, poorly healed. His looked clean, like a surgical cut, as if it had been drawn on with confidence. On the 28th, I tried to stay awake all night. I drank coffee, walked laps around my kitchen, even tied bells to my front doorknob so I'd hear if anyone entered. But somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., I must have drifted off. When I opened my eyes, the sun was rising, and the 29th had already begun. I ran to the mirror, half hoping not to see myself at all. But there I was, smiling, just slightly, not with cruelty, but with certainty. He blinked first. That was the first time I felt something close to defeat. Now the mirror isn't just in the bathroom. It's everywhere. Polished silverware, windows, puddles on the path to the cemetery. And in every one, he moves with less delay, less hesitation, like he's synchronizing with me until the last distinction fades. And I don't think I'm the original anymore. I think each time I bury someone on the 29th, each time I ignore the voice pleading, "Don't do this again," something of me is left behind. A layer, a thread, a sliver of doubt, sealed with dirt and silence. And what rises in my place is clearer, sharper, more willing. Sometimes I think the reflection is just waiting for one final moment. The last burial where I hesitate too long. The last word I fail to say. The last breath I hold instead of letting go. And then he'll step out. Fully. Entirely. Without needing glass to hold him in. And I'll be the one trapped behind it. Watching. Unable to blink. And no one will notice. Because the man who walks out will be me. Only better. I've always kept track of dates with a kind of reverence. The way priests treat scripture, or children count days until Christmas. The 29th has never been just another box on the calendar for me. It's a ritual now. A ticking pulse beneath the earth. Something that reminds me the world isn't entirely mine. Every time it arrives, it does so without fail, like a breath that the ground itself takes. But this year, I woke up on what should have been the 23rd and saw something I still can't explain. My wall calendar had changed. Not torn, not written over. Changed. 2 29ths. One at the end of the month where it always is. And another, somehow printed just 6 days before. Same font, same ink, same spacing. As if it had always been there and I had simply forgotten how to count. At first I thought it was a joke. Maybe some cruel trick my exhausted brain played on itself. I even went out to the general store to buy another calendar, needing something solid, something manufactured by someone else. But when I got home and unwrapped it, the second 29 was there too. No one else in the shop had noticed. No one seemed to care. They just sold me what I asked for, and smiled with that tired familiarity that small towns wear like a uniform. But I knew what it meant. I could feel it the way animals feel weather. Something beneath my ribs, something coiled and waiting. The next morning, I woke to the sound of silence. That might sound absurd, but silence has a tone when it's wrong. No birdsong, no wind, just the breath of the house settling into itself, heavy and still. I went to the front door, already bracing for the sight I didn't want. And there it was, directly in front of my porch. A grave. Not in the cemetery, not hidden among the rows, but there, in the middle of the path where the morning sun usually lands. The dirt was loose, freshly turned, but no shovel had touched it. No tracks, no signs of a dig. It was just there, like a blister in the earth that had burst open overnight, I stepped out barefoot and the soil was warm. Not from sunlight, but from something deeper. I didn't want to look, but my body moved without permission. I leaned over the edge and felt the air rise from it. Wet, earthy, sweet, like decay left too long in a sealed room. And something else. Something personal. The scent of my shaving cream. I ran back inside and locked the door, though I knew it was meaningless. I've buried enough bodies to understand that locks aren't made for what lives under the soil. My hands trembled as I checked the calendar again. Still, 2/29ths. And today was the first. The early one. The one that didn't belong. I tried to tell myself I could skip it. That breaking the cycle once might do something. Might give me back a little control. But the whisper started around noon. Not a voice. Not even language. But that same pressure in my ears I felt when I buried the one that looked like me. A fullness behind the eyes. A knowing. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned. I cooked. I scrubbed the tile grout with a toothbrush just to prove that I could make something clean again. But all the while, the dirt outside waited. It didn't shift. It didn't settle. It just waited. By evening, I stood at the threshold again. The sun had dipped behind the hills, and the shadow of the open grave stretched long across my porch like an invitation written in rot. I stepped outside, shovel in hand, though I hadn't intended to bring it. My fingers just knew. The ground gave way easily. Too easily. As if it wanted to be opened. As if it had never meant to hold anything in. And there, lying at the bottom, was a box. Not a coffin. A crate. Old wood, bound in rusted iron. The kind used for shipping things across oceans long forgotten. I pried it open, and inside was no body. No bones. Just a stack of pages. My handwriting again. Dozens of entries. Each dated with a different 29th. Each describing events I hadn't lived through yet. And the last page simply read, "Next one's not yours." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching my own reflection in the window. Too tired to be afraid. Too broken to be angry. He watched me too. That version of me that no longer blinked at the right time. He looked calm, ready, almost eager. And for a moment, I wondered if he had placed the second 29 on my calendar. If this was his way of pushing me closer to the end. If I had missed the moment he took over completely. Now I live with the certainty that time no longer belongs to me. That some months will come with an extra 29th. That graves will open without my hands. And names will be whispered before I arrive. I wonder how many 29ths it takes before I'm the one inside. Before the reflection I see is the only version that survives. I wonder if the second 29th was a mistake in the rules or the beginning of something else entirely. But most of all, I wonder what happens if a month comes with 3. I didn't leave the house for 3 days after the second 29th. Not out of fear. At least not the kind I used to understand. It was more like a sickness of the mind. Something disjointed. Unfastened. I kept thinking about those journal pages from the crate. Trying to remember writing them. Trying to feel some ghost of recognition in my hands or my bones. But nothing came. The ink looked like mine. The phrasing was mine. Even the spelling errors matched old habits I'd had in school. But the memories weren't there. Just echoes. Like dreams that don't belong to you. Yet you still wake up with their residue clinging to the corners of your mind. I told myself I wouldn't return to the cemetery for a while. That the grave in front of my house had been a mistake. A rupture in a pattern that was trying to right itself again. But when the next 29th arrived, and I swear I checked the calendar every day to be sure there was only one this time, I woke up to that smell again. Not rot. Not decay. Something older. Damp books. Rusted keys. Mildew on old wood. The air outside was heavy with it. I stepped out the back door, hoping for nothing, and found the earth split open beneath the sycamore at the edge of the west wall. The grave was deeper this time. Much deeper. The kind of depth that feels intentional, like someone, or something, had dug with purpose, layer after layer, carving through stone and root and time itself. And the dirt around it wasn't just fresh. It was wet, but not from rain. There hadn't been any in weeks. It smelled like the bottom of a forgotten well. I stood at the edge for longer than I should have, breathing the wet air, trying to decide whether I still had a choice. But I knew I didn't. I always bury it. That's the rule, spoken or not. I climbed down slowly, knees aching more than usual, and felt the air grow colder with each foot of descent. At the bottom lay a casket, this one not sealed in any traditional way. It wasn't nailed shut or locked. It wasn't even truly closed. The lid rested loosely over the opening, like it was just waiting for someone to look inside. I braced myself. Another body, another breathing stranger, another face I wasn't ready to see. But this time, there was no one, no flesh, no motion, just objects, laid out like offerings. The first thing I noticed was the journal, not the one from the crate, a different one, black leather, soft from age, pages yellowed and warped. I knew it instantly. I'd lost it as a child, back when my mother still packed lunches, and I still believed cemeteries were quiet. It was my dream journal. I hadn't seen it since I was 12. I picked it up and flipped through the pages. The first few were familiar. Drawings of monsters I'd claimed visited my window. Strange dreams of my house turning inside out. But after that, new entries. Dated last week, then yesterday, then today. Each one written in my childhood scrawl, detailing dreams I never remembered having. Dreams of digging, of returning, of being watched by something wearing my skin. Next to it was my father's watch, the one he wore every day of his life. It had stopped the day he died. I had buried it with him, personally. I remember tucking it into his coat pocket before the lid closed. I checked the time. It ticked now, smooth and steady, not like an old watch starting again, but like it had never stopped. And beside it, something small and strange, a tooth. I recognized the crack down the center. I'd lost it riding my bike down Cemetery Hill in 1986. No one found it. My mouth bled so much that day. I had cried, not for the pain, but for the loss of something mine. And here it was, clean, white, resting like a relic in a velvet-lined indentation of the coffin. I don't remember climbing out. I don't remember walking home. But I remember sitting on my kitchen floor for hours, just holding the watch, listening to it, feeling each tick as if it were embedded in my chest. That night, I dreamed again, not of graves, not of shadows, but of myself, young, unscarred, riding a bike too fast down a sunlit hill. I crashed again, felt the impact, the pain. But this time, when I looked up, someone was waiting at the bottom of the hill. A man in my coat, my boots, my face. He didn't help me. He just watched, smiling, calm, like he'd seen it all before, because he had. When I woke up, the journal was open beside me. The last page simply said, "You're remembering too fast." I don't know what that means. I don't know what rules I've already broken. But I know that grave wasn't just holding memories. It was giving them back, reordering them, binding them to the dirt in ways I still don't understand. And now, I feel the casket's shape when I lie down at night. I hear the watch ticking even when it's in another room. I check my mouth each morning, expecting to find another tooth missing. The graves are no longer just taking. They're rewriting, bit by bit, dream by dream, until one day I won't be sure what's mine anymore, or if any of it ever was. It began with my name, not the sound of it, not even the voice, but the way it was said. You spend your whole life hearing your name butchered slightly by others, syllables emphasized wrong, the rhythm just a bit off, a hesitation before the second vowel, but you still answer, because it's close enough. But this was different. It was exact. Like my mother used to say it when I was too far down the road and she needed me home for dinner. Like the way I used to say it aloud to test how it sounded when I thought I might become someone else. The name came from behind me, barely above a whisper, but it felt like it was spoken directly inside my head, bypassing the air and the trees and the birds overhead. I turned, fast, shovel clenched like a weapon. There was no one there, just the wind curling around the headstones and the growing dark. But it didn't stop there. The name followed me. It came again the next day, as I passed the chapel, and then again the morning after, just before the sun breached the horizon. It never came at night. It was always just at the edge of light, in the quiet hours where the world decides whether to wake or not. And it was always my name, spoken with care, with precision, as though whoever said it had been practicing for years. The next grave, of course, appeared right on time, another 29th. I had marked the calendar this time in red ink, circled the date twice, and told myself I wouldn't go near the western row no matter what. But by mid-morning, the scent was there again. That deep, earthy rot mixed with something like sandalwood and iron. I fought it. I really did. But by noon, I was out there, boots on, shovel in hand, staring down at a perfectly carved hole that hadn't been there the night before. It was deeper than usual, almost daring me to lean too close. I dropped a small rock in and waited. No echo, just a soft thud. The air rising from the opening was colder than I expected, and when I knelt, I saw something glinting near the edge of the pit. It was another letter, same parchment, same handwriting, But this one didn't give instructions. It only said, "Don't forget your voice." I took it home, placed it beside the others. I had a drawer now full of letters I never wrote. The penmanship was always mine, unmistakably mine, down to the hesitation before crossing the T's and the exaggerated curl on the F's. I studied them at night, sometimes reading them aloud just to see if it changed anything. And sometimes, when I read the name at the top, my name, I would hear the whisper again, closer, more patient, as if waiting for me to finally understand something I was too afraid to admit. I started dreaming of mirrors, dozens of them, all hung crookedly on the walls of my childhood home. In each reflection, a different version of me, some older, some younger, some wearing uniforms I never earned, some missing eyes or mouths or hands. But all of them would look up when I entered the room. All of them would say my name in unison, not a chant, not an accusation, just a greeting, as though they'd been waiting, as though they remembered me. I'd wake in sweat, throat hoarse, unsure if I had whispered my name back. The next time I heard the whisper, I followed it. It led me past the graves, past the chapel, to the old stone shed that no one used anymore. The lock was rusted through, the hinges swollen with years of rain. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten ledgers. In the far corner, something gleamed beneath a tarp. I pulled it back slowly and found a mirror, tall, ornate, framed in cracked gold paint. My face stared back, hollow-eyed and pale. But when I moved, the reflection didn't. It just stood there, still as the grave, and whispered my name again, perfectly, without moving its lips. I stumbled back, heart racing, unsure if I had imagined it, but the voice had lodged in my skull like a nail. I left the shed, but the whisper followed. It didn't speak often, just once a day, always at dawn, always behind me, never threatening, just waiting. It felt like it wanted something, not for me, but for me, like it was guiding me somewhere I wasn't ready to go. Then the grave appeared in my front yard again. Same depth, same chill, but this time, the dirt around it was shaped like footprints, mine, leading to the edge, then vanishing. There was no coffin inside, just a mirror, identical to the one in the shed, but this one was cracked, hairline fractures running through the glass like veins, and behind the reflection, I could see movement, not mine, not mimicked, just slightly off, like a delay in a broadcast. It smiled, and the whisper came again, louder now, still careful, still exact. "You're almost ready," it said, and then, "We need to finish what you started." I don't know what that means. I don't remember starting anything, but I can feel it now, the shift inside me. My voice sounds different in recordings. My handwriting is changing subtly with each day, and sometimes when I speak my name aloud, I don't recognize the shape it makes in my mouth, like it belongs to someone else, like it was never mine to begin with. The whisper is still with me, closer now, warmer, like breath on the back of my neck, and I've stopped turning around when I hear it, because I know what I'll see. I know whose lips will be moving, and I know the name they'll be saying. I don't know what day it is anymore, not in the way calendars used to matter to me, not in a way that fits within weeks and months and the rotation of the world. The 29th isn't just a date now, it's a rhythm, a pull, a voice beneath the ground that reshapes time itself around me. Every tick of the clock feels off by a second, like my heartbeat no longer follows the same tempo as the rest of the living. I woke this morning already dressed. Not that I remember putting on my boots or grabbing my coat, but the soil-stained sleeves and the grit in my hair told me I had been outside. The mirror avoided me again. It's done that for days, my reflection slowing just enough to let me know it doesn't need me anymore, like it's found its own agency. When I smile, it holds its stare. When I blink, it watches. And when I whisper to myself, trying to anchor what little of me is left to this body, it mouths something different, a word I haven't dared translate. Not yet. I made coffee and didn't drink it. My hands moved as though on a track, a pre-recorded routine that had no purpose but movement. The calendar on the fridge still said 28, but I knew better. The paper was damp at the edges, and behind the printed number, another was bleeding through. 29. I didn't mark it. I didn't change it. But I saw it, and I knew it was time. Again, I opened the drawer where I kept the letters. All mine. All signed in my hand. Sealed with the same kind of wax I hadn't used since I was a child playing at mystery games. Some still unread. Some burned at the corners, as though they'd been retrieved from fires I never lit. One sat on top this time, a new one, The paper smelled like rain and pine and something metallic underneath. Inside, only one line. Next time, don't open it. But I already had, and I knew I always would. The earth outside had already been turned. The grave was there, waiting. It always is. This time, no tools were missing. No flickering light above the western row. Just an open silence, like the ground had finally grown tired of pretending it needed me. I stepped toward it with less hesitation than I should have had. I didn't feel like I was walking forward anymore, but being carried, my limbs floating inside themselves, responding more to memory than choice. The grave was deeper than before, the kind of depth meant for secrets, not bodies. And inside, something shifted. It wasn't a coffin this time. It was a chair, my old writing desk, a stack of papers, my pen, and one final note, unsigned, resting on the surface. Bury it, it said. Bury the last thought. I stepped down into the grave. The walls held firm like theater curtains drawn tight around a stage. I picked up the pen. It still had the groove from where my thumb pressed too hard over the years. I held the page, blank, but not empty. I could feel the weight of everything I hadn't said pressing at the edges of my mind, crowding toward the surface like a tide I had ignored too long. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. The thought came all at once. A single, clean sentence. The kind you don't edit. The kind you don't erase. I wrote it down. My hand didn't shake. The ink flowed smooth and certain. I folded the page, placed it inside the drawer built into the desk, and stood back. The grave began to fill itself. The dirt moved like breath. I didn't have to lift a finger. It covered the chair, then the paper, then the wood, then my boots. And still, I didn't move. But I didn't suffocate. I didn't lose light. Instead, I found myself at the chapel again, standing before the mirror. This time, the reflection nodded. It seemed grateful, not joyous, not triumphant, just quietly complete. And in its eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Rest. Not for me, perhaps, but for the version of me that had waited all this time to be heard, to be given form again. I stepped forward. The glass was warm. I raised my hand, and so did it. But when our fingers met the surface, mine passed through, and I understood. I wasn't the real one anymore. Maybe I never had been. Maybe the moment I opened the first letter, or buried the first living body, or heard my name whispered just right, something had stepped in, not to take over, but to remember, to bring back something forgotten. And now that the last thought was buried, now that the note had been written, there was no more need for the man who doubted, who hesitated, who listened instead of obeyed. The grave is quiet now, but the whisper is louder than ever. It doesn't say my name anymore. It says, thank you. And sometimes, in the hour before dawn, I find myself whispering back, not in fear, not in resistance, but in recognition. Because the 29th isn't just a date. It's a return. It's a mouth that opens below the ground and waits for the one who remembers how to speak. I was the voice once, but not anymore. I buried that voice. I buried that thought. And what's left of me now digs.